Good morning. We're called to order this meeting of the Board of Trustees of the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System at approximately 10 a.m., June 6, 2025, in the Cordell Hall Building, Senate Room, Hearing Room 1 in Nashville, Tennessee. I'm David Lillard, Tennessee State Treasurer, and I welcome you to this meeting, serve as chair of the meeting. The first item we'll have today will be to call the roll of the members.
Mr. Barker.
Here.
Mr. Cox.
Here.
Mr. Ellis.
Here.
Secretary Hargett.
Here.
Treasurer Lillard.
Here.
Director Long.
Here.
Miss Maxwell.
Here.
Miss Moore.
Here.
Mr. Stanfield.
Here.
Mr. Wormsley.
Here.
I'm present as well. You have a quorum.
Okay, very good. Chair declares a quorum present. Next item will be the minutes of the March 7, 2025 meeting that are in your packet. Is there a motion with respect to the minutes to approve same?
Move we approve.
All right, we have a motion from Mr. Barker. Is there a second?
Second.
We have a second. All right. Any discussion? Seeing none, we'll do this by voice vote. All those members in favor signify by saying aye. Aye. Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and the minutes are approved. All right, we're going to change our order a little bit today because we've got some members that have some time constraints with us. And one of the first things that we want to do is to do the TCRS experience study, which is item number 8 on your agenda, I believe, on the updated agenda. And we'll call on Justin Thacker of USI Consulting to give us that report. The materials are in your packet.
Good morning.
All right.
Let me get this set up here. We have a lot of information to cover. If we did it justice, we'd probably be here 2 or 3 hours. So we will hit the highlights on some things and tell you the things that we think are important for you to focus on. My colleague here, Tim Lavender, and I are going to share some content for you here. So the purpose of our discussion today is to talk about an experience study. So we show up a couple times a year to bring you results of our actuarial evaluation, which relate to cost, funding recommendations, funding projections, funded status, the health of the plan, all the things that we measure with regard to the pension plan. Those are based on numerous assumptions. And so the law requires that we look at these assumptions at least every 6 years. The TCRS policy is to look at them every 4 years. So every 4 years we stop, take a breath, look back at what actually happened over the past 4 years, and then look forward to reset our assumptions. And the idea here being we're not necessarily looking to make drastic changes. We just want to look backwards, see where things are different than we thought they would be, and make some small tweaks as we move forward. A high-level principle here is one thing to remember. As we change assumptions for the pension plan, we're not really changing the cost of the plan. The true cost of the plan is adding up all the benefit payments that the system will eventually pay to all of its participants. You add those up, that's how much the plan will eventually cost. We're just trying to set assumptions to predict what those will cost or to anticipate what the cost will be in the future so that you can properly fund for them. So all the changes that we're recommending today, while they may impact the contribution rate recommendation, they may have a small impact on the current funded status, they're not truly changing the benefits of the plan. It's just how we measure them to try to be more accurate. And then we look at several different types of assumptions. We have what we call demographic assumptions. It's more participant behavior, whether that be mortality, retirement rates, turnover, the types of things that are not necessarily financially driven. And then we have economic assumptions, inflation, discount rate, long-term investment rate of return, compensation increases, all the pieces that reflect a pension benefit. So we break those 2 sections out and work through those in terms of not only setting our assumptions, but trying to monitor them with each actuarial evaluation. The process we go through, we look at a 4-year period. In fact, we've collected data for the past 4 years, but because we have the benefit of looking at previous studies, we've actually been looking back up to like 16 years at times in this study to see trends and try to identify different economic cycles. We look at what actually happened versus what we were expecting to happen over the past 4 years, and then we make some analysis and make some decisions based off of what we see when we look at that. A couple other quick points. We do look at the teacher group separate from the state group. History has proven to us that those two groups behave differently in terms of not just patterns of retirement or turnover, but also mortality. So we want to look at those separately and with each individual group, and we'll make recommendations accordingly. High level, also just as a quick point on how many people we're looking at, the legacy plan has 161,000 active employees and 185,000 retired participants, and those are employees that were hired prior to July 1, 2014. And then the hybrid pension plan has nearly 80,000 active participants and a small number of retireds at this point, given the relative newness of that plan. So those are all the people that we're looking at, all the participants that we're looking at when we gather data and then compare our assumptions. And then another point here that we would like to do, if possible, we'd like to conform to industry standards. We don't want TCRS to veer off from the norms, so we also want to look at what others are doing across the country. Also, if there are some standards that are available that we can use, we would like to start with those as our baseline for setting our assumptions as well. And we'll talk a little bit more about those as we jump into some specific examples. So, okay, Tim?
All right, thanks, Justin. So he's kind of already laid out the overview of all the assumptions we're going to look at. We're going to break it up into two pieces. This first block is looking at the demographics, like how the participants will behave, how long they will live, rates of disability, turnover, as far as leaving the job to go elsewhere, and then at what age they retire. Again, as he said, got a lot of analysis here. We're just going to go over some of the highlights that we'd like to point out, and one of those I'd like to start with is looking at post-retirement mortality. So that's as your members retire, how long do they live during retirement? So slide 11, taking a look first at the experience over the last 4 years versus what our prior assumption was. So I want to start out with, as an actuary, we can get down in the numbers, but we do have a heart, and we recognize that, looking at this period, this did cover a pandemic, and, a lot of us were affected by the pandemic and know people that were lost during that time. So while we're looking at the numbers here, we don't want to be insensitive to knowing that this was a pandemic period we were looking at. And that did show true on the TCRS experience as well. So as expected, you can look here, teachers, that bold line overall, had 10% more deaths during this period than expected. Again, this is from 2020 to 2024, and we'll look in a little bit more detail at a year-by-year analysis. Then also looking down, the general state also saw the same thing, overall average of 8% more deaths during that period. Again, unfortunately, as would be expected during this pandemic period. Also got it broken down into male and female, but we'll get into that a little bit more on a future slide. So here breaking down the pandemic period into, this is years ending June 30th, 21, 22, 23, and 24. And as you can see highlighted in that blue area, that's where you see significantly higher mortality during those pandemic years. And then we actually see, so when you see 116%, just to draw your attention to that first line under teachers, that means that we had 16% more deaths than expected. So 116% of our assumption went up to nearly 122% in 22, and then down to 112% in 23. And then in 24, you can see we actually had fewer deaths than expected. And that's also consistent with what we see in the national trends, that not only was there higher number of deaths during the pandemic, but people that would have lived till 2024, parts of the pandemic accelerated those deaths to have more deaths in those earlier years, leaving fewer deaths in 2024. So this actually lined up very well with, or in line with what we saw across the national data. So TCRS did not see anything significantly different from what was seen across the nation. Same is true looking at the general state. We don't have to go through the details of the numbers there, but just pointing this out that those 3 years were definitely a significant, where the higher number of deaths were coming from was during that pandemic period. So after we adjust for that, based on the national trends, the IRS actually has factors that were used across the national data to adjust for the pandemic period. So we've got here the COVID adjusted observations. So while we saw 10% more deaths than expected overall, when we don't adjust, after we've adjusted for the pandemic, it was actually right in line with our assumption. You can see, again, on that bolded, overall, the teachers had less than 1% variance, 0.6% more deaths than expected, and the general state, 0.6% less deaths. So that's the main point that we wanted to kind of drive in on your life expectancy, is that it's actually, once adjusted for the pandemic, right in line with where the assumptions were. So we're not seeing a big change there. The secondary point would be, broken down male and female. You can see both for teachers and for general state. We did see actually a little bit of improvement among the males. That's something we've not seen for quite a while. Males living longer than expected. We had less deaths in both groups, and the females slightly more deaths. But again, netted out overall to right in line. Next two slides really just put that on a graph. Same thing that we just talked about. I won't spend a lot of time here other than to just point out that orange line is the number of deaths, liability weighted, that were experienced over that period. The dark blue line was what our assumption was. So again, as already talked about, we had that higher deaths than assumed, but once we adjust for the pandemic, you can see the dashed line right in line with that orange line. So again, just a picture of what we just described. The teachers, same thing on the general state. Once adjusted for the pandemic, the dashed line right in line with the orange line. So just to wrap up the mortality, we then just took your experience, compared it to a industry table, and it's called the Pub 2016 table. That 2016 year, while it may seem like that's 10 years old, actually just was published this last month, finalized this last month. 2016 was the midpoint of the whole experience period that the Society of Actuaries looked at. So that is the most recent national table available, and we have adjusted your experience to that national table. And that is where our recommendation comes from. So we've got current assumption here. This is on slide 17. Your current assumption was based on the old Pub 2010 table. We recommend updating that to the Pub 2016 table, and then adjusting that to your experience, which again is very little change from your prior assumption. So any other comments on that piece? That's really the main demographic piece that we wanted to go over. I'm going to look at retirement next, but if there's no questions, we'll go on. We've also got in here, on the next slide, we will not spend nearly as much time unless there's any questions on, we looked at disabled lives, what their mortality was. We adjusted that to the latest table. So the recommendation is to move that in line. Same thing on pre-retirement. So jump over here to, this is prior to retirement, your employees, how long they live, their members, and we're adjusting that to the current table as well. Fortunately, there's not a lot of in-service deaths, so there's just not a lot of experience there, so just using the national table is what we would recommend. So Pub 2016 here on slide 20 is our recommendation for prior to retirement mortality. We also looked at rates of disability, so people being disabled while in service, and not a lot that we want to discuss here today because we're not recommending any changes on that. We see a low amount of disabilities during the period, and your overall costs are not very sensitive to that assumption, so we're recommending just keeping that as is. The next one, looking at your turnover, so people leaving employment with the system and going elsewhere, and retirement. We're going to kind of look at these together, and this will close out our demographic assumptions before I turn it over to Justin to take it home on the economic side. So for turnover, starting here on slide 24, not to get into a whole lot of the detail, but you've got, we look at 3 different sections of termination for people working their first year of retirement. So that second bullet there, First year of service, what their turnover is, second year of service, what their chances of turnover are, and then beyond that is called the ultimate. So for the rest of their time, after someone's been in a job 2 years, we see that it pretty much behaves similarly other than adjusting for age. So we looked at each of those bands, and then for retirement, we also break it up into seeing that there is normally an additional incidence of retirement in the first year someone reaches retirement eligibility. So we looked at that. And then as well as after age 60, those that have 15 years of service, we see a bump up in retirement for that group of people. So for these assumptions, the bottom of the slide there, we actually looked, as Justin kind of already referenced, at the last 4 studies, so really a 16-year period to get an idea of what the trends are, because we'll go ahead and look at the next slide. This looks at turnover over that 16-year period. And to explain this graph, the dotted black line, that's your assumption for turnover, people leaving the system. And this is just all putting it into a single average of how did we compare to the assumption over those 16 years. And you can look, the dark blue line would be your general government, general state, that in all 16 years, all 4 periods, you see that blue bar, we actually had higher turnover than expected. So there we are recommending an increase in that assumption to assume that we are having higher turnover because we're seeing that across all cycles. And again, I would kind of highlight too, you can see that really consistent, you have low, high, as we've had different economic cycles. And that's why we like to look at a 16-year period rather than each study chasing exactly what the turnover was for that period, trying to smooth it out over a longer period. Then the next one we'd like to look at is that green or teal line. That's your political subdivisions. And those, exactly to the point, they're below the assumption, then above the assumption, below the assumption, then above the assumption, but over that period, averaging right out to that dashed line. So we're not recommending any change for that group. The teachers, they are below, above, but you can see that the 2 years where the orange is higher is actually significantly higher than when we're below. So to actually pump up 2 slides here, we've got the same thing on just looking at it on a graph. We will, for time's sake, move on past these graphs. But to get to the turnover recommendation, what we just discussed, we're recommending increasing the assumption for teachers and for general state to have higher turnover and no change to the political subdivisions. So, any questions on that assumption? All right, same thing, just briefly on the retirement. Don't have to belabor the point of how this graph works, but we looked at each of those groups and looked at retirements in the first year of eligibility here on this graph, and political subdivisions, maybe the first easiest one to look at, of above and below, averaging out, we don't expect any change or see any change in that assumption. But for the teacher's plan, we are seeing slightly lower, particularly in the last 2 cycles, and only having 1 year where it was above, we are recommending a slight reduction in the retirement assumption. Same point on, we looked at retirements beyond age 60. Here you can see that the general government, that dark blue line, had retirements above the assumption in all years. So we are recommending that beyond just looking at the current year, all 4 years would signify that we need to increase that assumption. And so we are making that recommendation, and teachers actually have seen lower retirement during that period. So we're extending that, that same recommendation for beyond age 60. So to wrap up, on the demographic slide, just what we just discussed, our recommendations on retirement are lowering the retirement increment for teachers prior to age 60 in that first year of eligibility, and then after age 60, decreasing it for teachers and a slight bump up for the general state. So I know that was kind of a lot of information in a short period, but just to kind of condense all that, all the analysis we did down to these couple of recommendations that we wanted to bring before you here. So, turn it over to Justin for the economic side.
Okay, any final questions on that? I will say The demographic assumptions involves all those hundreds of thousands of records over 4 years, which multiplies all those records by 4. So Jennifer Butler, sitting behind me, one of our colleagues, works really hard to review those and comes up with a lot of questions that your staff answered perfectly. So just wanted to say thank you to the TCRS staff who also, we would not be able to produce this without good data. I always say garbage in, garbage out. And so if we recognize there's some things that we need to better understand, being able to be responsive to answer our questions is so critical. And so we're very, very appreciative of that. So thank you, guys. Okay, so with regard to the economic assumptions, you'll see a theme here very similar to some of the things that Tim was talking about. We're trying not to chase short-term trends. We want to look at long-term trends. We don't want to create significant volatility for the plan, but we want to make sure that over the long term, we're on the right track. So a similar theme here with these concepts for inflation. We have what we call a building block approach to setting these economic assumptions, and it all starts with our inflation assumption. So we start there and then build off of that to all the other assumptions. We looked back at a history of inflation, and then we also want to compare to forward-looking projections among market professionals and figure out what's the right. We can look in the rearview mirror, but we really want to be looking out the front windshield to make some decisions. So if we look back historically, over most periods of time, shorter term periods of inflation capture the pandemic, which had a spike in inflation. Longer term periods of inflation captures the 70s and 80s, which also had a very significant spike in inflation. So a lot of those are going to be a little bit higher. If we look at the past, look at a history and exclude the couple of years during the pandemic, maybe it comes into a little bit more of a focus. But I'll be honest, we don't really know what to expect. I mean, this is a bit of an educated guess, and we're going to revisit this again in 4 years. There's lots of volatility in the marketplace, uncertainties in all the financial markets. So if we look at a 35-year average, excluding the most recent 2 years of higher inflation during the pandemic, we could see about a 2.4% average. That happens to be consistent with most forward-looking projections that we see out in the marketplace from either Social Security Administration or other investment professionals. And so there is some consistency there. So our recommendation is our current cost of living or our current inflation assumption is 2.25. We set that 4 years ago, back when inflation was very, very low, near zero in some cases. And so now we're recommending that we bump that up 15 basis points to 2.4% to be more in line with forward-looking forecasts that we see in the marketplace. A slight upward movement feels appropriate in today's market environment, but we're also going to take a wait-and-see approach. We'll look at it again in 4 years, and then we'll continue moving upward if that's the pattern that we continue to see. One other piece related to the inflation is the cost of living assumption within TCRS. So TCRS uses a inflation adjustment, but there is a cap of 3% applied to pension benefits. So to the extent that future inflation is always 2.4, if it were to be exactly 2.4 every single year, we would never exceed the cap. Therefore, the TCRS COLA would also be 2.4%. But we know what happens in practice is sometimes inflation gets a little higher and it pops up over 3% and the 3% cap applies. So we know that because of that and throughout history, the inflation assumption or the cost of living assumption within the TCRS plan, which is the one that we care most about for projecting benefits, needs to be slightly different than the actual inflation assumption itself. This you can see here over time. The red line is the TCRS cost of living adjustment that was granted in any given year. The blue line is the inflation that was measured in any given year. So you can see the 3% line is the peak there. So that also shows, though, that if you were to average the red line, it would be a little bit less than the true inflation of the blue line during all those years. So similarly to what we were looking at with inflation, if we look back at some historical periods, removing the past couple of years, the 2 highest years of the pandemic, a 35-year average would show that if you apply the cap, the 3% cap, to the inflation history, you would get around a 2.25% average for the TCRS cost of living benefit. So that is our recommendation, is that the current cost of living assumption was 2.125 compared to the 2.25% inflation assumption, so a small decrease. If we are increasing the inflation assumption to 2.4, we're now recommending to increase the TCRS COLA inflation by a small amount as well to get to 2.25. So just trying to make sure those two assumptions match up going forward. Any questions on inflation? Okay. The most significant assumption that we make, the most significant source of volatility that we have is the investment return. And we want to make sure and approach that carefully with each experience study, looking at market trends going forward and also looking at the history. This is a history of TCRS returns, and as you can see by looking at the far right-hand column, well, the middle column shows you the volatility and the variability of any given year. So, you know, regardless of how great your investment staff is, they can't control market volatility. There's outside forces at play here. But the goal is to have a long-term assumption that we think is reasonable. If we look back at 30-year histories ending in each of those years, the lowest number on this page is 7.2. Most recently, 7.5% 30-year average. So the TCRS investment returns have been very good over any period of time if you look back far enough in history. So that's looking in the rearview mirror. So let's park that for a second. And then let's look forward and see what the market professionals are telling us could be a reasonable expectation of investment returns. We want to look at each asset allocation that TCRS is invested in. So that's why we look at the investment policy. We look at capital market forecasts for each of those asset allocation groups, and then try to build a future forecast from that. There is a survey out there that includes 26 different investment organizations. Horizon puts this survey out. They collect investment forecast from all those different organizations and look forward with prediction opportunities for us to look at. If we look at that group and we compare that to the asset allocation of TCRS, it suggests that a reasonable rate of return assumption would be 6.95%. Currently, we are assuming 6.75%, by the way. That was established 4 years ago after the experience study. The Verus team has some analysis as well. If we look at that in comparison to the asset allocation and inflation forecast going forward, they're coming up with 6.74%, which is also very close to our current 6.75% assumption. So let's hold that information for a second. We've got our current assumption, our history that we've talked about, the forward-looking forecast. Let's think about what's the rest of what are the other public plans doing? What are the trends in the marketplace and in the pension industry? As you can see on the left-hand side here, this is from the NASRA website. They provide surveys of other public plans regularly. This was most recently updated a couple of months ago. But back into the last 20 years or so, you can see the lines on the left represent the assumption that is being used for other public pension plans. Back in the early 2000s, most plans were assuming 8% or even higher in some cases. This is an average. That trend has declined significantly. TCRS has also declined. We were using 7.5 for a while, then 7.25, and then last time we dropped it to 6.75. But the trend, if you look at the last 3 or 4 years, has leveled off. There's very few. The averages are staying pretty steady. They're not trending back up yet. They're not continuing to go down. And looking at the bars on the right in terms of the groupings of different plans that are using 6.5 and above or 7, the 6.75% that TCRS is currently using still feels like it's the right assumption at the moment. When we blend in our historical returns, ongoing forecast, what the rest of the industry is doing. And again, like most of the other assumptions we've talked about, this isn't a long-term decision. We get to reset this in 4 years. So we'll keep monitoring it, but for now we think this is the right approach. So this is our recommendation, to stick with the 6.75%. Among all the market volatility and all of the news and the chaos that you see out in the world, we want to kind of look past the short-term fluctuations and really just look toward what we think a long-term forecast could be. Okay, any questions on that? Just a couple of final points then, and we'll be finished. We also look at compensation increases that we set, because the pension benefit involves compensation as a component of determining what that pension benefit will be in the future, which we forecast. Compensation increases tie generally to inflation. Also could depend upon the particular organization as to what their budgets are, whether they can afford to provide additional compensation to keep up with inflation or not. And so we set this compensation growth assumption based on the core of inflation and then add some other layers on top of that. Currently, we are assuming about a 4% average, and we know from all industries that those right out of the early years in their career, just beginning their careers in their 20s, tend to have higher compensation increases as they are learning their craft and growing and developing their skills, and that tends to taper off as we get older. So the current TCRS assumption goes from around 9% or so, a little below that at age 20, grading down to about 3.5% at age 70. That's how we get a 4% average. That's our current assumption. So we wanted to look at the last 4 years and see if there was anything we could learn from that period. And like mortality and other things, there was a lot going on in the last 4 years. We actually saw raises across state and teacher plans averaging around 7.5% over that 4-year period. And some years were more than that even, some were a little bit less. There were some initiatives going on within various groups within state government during that time period to suggest to us that data, frankly, is just not very useful. I don't think there's much we can glean from that to really look forward to set long-term assumptions. And so we're reverting back to looking at our core assumption. We increased inflation by 15 basis points. So we're going to allow our compensation increase to also grow by 15 basis points to now average 4.15% looking forward. And again, we'll look at this again in 4 years and we'll tweak it if we need to. The last piece is very immaterial. Overall, there is a Social Security wage-based piece that represents how part of the pension benefit is calculated, and it's very much tied to inflation. So currently, we're assuming the Social Security wage-based grows at 2.75. We'll add that extra 15 basis points of the inflation growth to that, bringing that up to 2.9%. Oh yeah, one last slide. Any questions on any of those recommendations from an economic assumption standpoint? Okay, the last point I wanted to make is there are what we call option factors within TCRS. It's when a participant retires, they have a series of options available to them for their pension benefit. They can select a benefit that would be payable to them through their life and then a percentage of that benefit to be payable to their spouse after their life ends. They can elect pop-up features, early retirement reductions. All those are designed to be equivalent to TCRS so that the plan itself doesn't care which choice the participant makes because it's equivalent. Well, in order to be equivalent, it has to use our assumptions. And so to the extent that these assumption recommendations that we're making with inflation, cost of living, mortality, we will alter those TCRS option factors with the new assumptions so that as participants retire going forward, those benefits will be actuarially equivalent to any of the other choices that they had to make. This is something that we do with each experience study. The changes are usually very minor. It's not a significant material difference, but it will be a small adjustment to those TCRS option factors. And that is all of our prepared comments. Happy to take any questions.
Okay, any questions of Mr. Thacker or Mr. Lavender about the report, the experience study report? All right, seeing none, Chair would entertain a motion to approve the report, including the recommendations set forth therein. Is there a motion? So moved. I have a motion. Is there a second? I have a second. All right. Any further discussion? Seeing none, Mr. Secretary, would you call the roll on the motion to adopt?
And Mr. Barker? Yes. Mr. Cox?
Yes.
Mr. Ellis?
Aye.
Secretary Hargett? Aye. Treasurer Lillard?
Aye.
Director Long?
Aye.
Ms. Maxwell?
Aye.
Ms. Moore?
Aye.
Mr. Stanfield?
Aye.
Mr. Wormsley?
Aye.
I vote aye as well. It's unanimous.
All right, the report is adopted. Thank you very much, Mr. Thacker and Mr. Lavender and your firm for
Thank you.
your
We
great
appreciate
work
the
on
opportunity to do
okay, and
this.
many other things. All right, I want to quickly, I know Secretary Hargett's got to go in a few minutes here, but I wanted him to participate in the next segment of our meeting here. We have several members who are retiring from the Board of Trustees today. And I just want to comment that Of course, the foundational base of TCRS, its governing body, is the TCRS Board of Trustees. Each of us that serves on the board has a fiduciary duty to each of our members out there, both active and retired, with respect to our activities for the pension system. These activities that we do, some of which can be somewhat tedious, like economic assumption studies and things like that, and valuation studies and a lot of other things. They can be a little tedious, but it commands our attention and commands our dialogue, because that's how we shape the overall policies of our system. And I happen to think that one of the reasons that our system is one of the very best funded systems in the country, also one of the best managed systems in the country, is because of the attention and the dedication that members of the board have shown through the years. Now, I will say, too, that doesn't depend on how long you serve on the board. Members who serve just one term of 2 or 3 years on the board, they contribute a great deal to what we do, as well as those who serve longer. But it is unusual when you have a situation where you have members who have served an extremely long time. And today, as part of the people who are retiring, and we're going to call out the names of all the people who are retiring from the board today, but we're going to start with Mr. Michael Barker. Mr. Barker is a member of the board who has been on the board for 21 years. Which is a long, long time. And I've been here going on 17 years as treasurer, so he outdates me even and all that, and many other people around here as well. Now, we do have Mr. Wormsley, who's on the board, that has served about 25 years total. Mr. Barker's service is continuous for that 21 years. And the staff today has prepared under Shelley King, our communications director, and also Cal Baxter, our communications assistant, has prepared a video that we'd like to show you about Mr. Barker and his service.
I could be doing things, and if I have an opportunity to assist in anything, and I have the ability to do that, I try to do that. I think that's important in community building.
If you talk to Mr. Barker at any length of time, he's been a public servant no matter what time of his career he's in.
Mr. Barker embodies dedication. You know, if you talk about the word dedication and devotion to duty, he exhibits that in numerous ways.
I retired on June the 30th of 1990, and I started as the director of the Humboldt Chamber of Commerce on September the 1st.
Mr. Barker is such a smart man, and I have enjoyed getting to know him because he's from West Tennessee as well.
I started as a member of the Board of Trustees on July the 1st, 2004. During the next legislative session, that position, representing retired teachers, was made a full voting member of the Board of Trustees.
If he's going to be appointed and involved in something, he's going to be 110% in it.
Being a former teacher, and I still think that I am teachers really, they retire, but they don't quit being involved in education.
I think that speaks volumes to who he is as representing the retired teachers.
Represent a large group of people who have given a lot of service to the students of Tennessee. It's a really important aspect of what I see my role.
Whoever fills his shoes, he's got some big shoes to fill. Conscientious about being at the meetings, he's well versed on what he does, and he just has a real interest in the retirement system and the people that he represents.
And even though we represent different groups, we all work together as overall management and of the retirement system. So it's for everybody, all the retirees, and also all the people who are paying into the system.
We're just lucky and very, very privileged to have worked with Mike Barker in this capacity. And furthermore, the teachers of the state, the governmental employees of the state, both past, present, and future, will be a lot better off for what Michael Barker has done over the last 21 years in his service on the TCRS board.
It's been a great professional experience for me to be a part of the TCRS board. I have really enjoyed it. It's been amazing. to be a part of that, say the opportunity to work with some of the best people I've ever worked with as a part of the retirement system.
For Mr. Barker, congratulations on this new phase of transitioning to something else. I know that you'll leave this service on the board and you'll just go to some other service that you're going to provide to your community, and I look forward to hearing great things about you and welcome you back at any opportunity you have to come join us.
Okay, there we are. Now, I want to ask Mr. Barker to come up here to the front a second. Come up here, if you would. Now, Mr. Barker has commented to me over the years that, you know, he noticed we wear these little pins that have Treasury on them. He's got one of these plain flag pins on right now that doesn't have Treasury on the bottom of it. Up until this point, Mr. Barker, only Treasury employees are entitled to receive a Treasury pin, okay? But today, I'm going to present you and make you an honorary employee of the Treasury Department, a Treasury Department pin. So you're the only person who has one. So
That's great. That other one is one you gave me.
yeah, I know, and I just dropped the back one. There we go. That's right. So we're going to make you an honorary Treasury employee. Now, I hasten to add that does not carry any salary with it. It does not carry any enhanced retirement benefits. Okay, you got whatever benefits you got. That's all you got. Okay.
The pleasure was being with all of you all these years.
That's right. That's right. Well, have a seat there and tell us about your career as a teacher right quick, okay?
I won't be as long as Justin was in his presentation, but it was great in the detail. I actually started teaching high school science teacher in 1961. I taught for a while at Humboldt High School. I was principal of elementary school in Humboldt, and then I joined the Tennessee Department of Education for the next 25 years. So I had a great career in education. I taught some great students. I still see some of them from 1961 that I taught, and so that's an interesting thing to have that kind of career and to see people now that they actually taught. My wife was a high school math teacher as well, and so we've had education in our family all the way through. My son's involved in education in Memphis right now, and my daughter was a teacher in Shelby County in Nashville. But I really appreciate the opportunity to be an honorary member of the Treasury Department, a great group. You all don't know how much this means to me to see this video. Shelley was kind of a surprise there. I went through 2 or 3 different interviews in Nashville to be a part of some of the recognition for the 50th anniversary for TCRS. But it has been a great professional experience to get to know you and to work with you and to have the opportunity to serve on the Board of Trustees for 21 years. Thank you so much.
Thank you. All right. And we also want to thank our 2 state employee representatives whose terms end this month, Mark Stanfield and Mike Cox, for your service to the board and the trustees during these past 3 years. I also understand that Mr. Cox will be retiring this year, and we're grateful for your 31 years of service at the TBI. So to them, to both Mr. Stanfield and Mr. Cox, we say thank you. Tim Ellis, who has served the board for the past 7 years as the municipal employee representative, will be leaving the position at the end of this month. We thank you for representing the voices of local government employees across Tennessee and your service on the investment committee of the TCRS. Thank you for your service. And Patsy Moore. Ms. Moore is a longtime dedicated board member for the last 14 years, and she begins her retirement this month. She has taught in McNairy County Schools for 41 years. And I know you've touched many lives over those years, just like Mr. Barker did during his career as an educator, and have advocated for teacher retirement benefits during your time on the board. Now, I'll have to add that we're attempting to repurpose Ms. Moore. She is so good that we have recommended to the powers that be that she be reappointed to the board in a different position. So we're hoping that that will come to fruition. But in the event that it shouldn't for some reason, I just want to make sure we make note of your longtime service and your dedicated service to the TCRS Board of Trustees. Thank you, Ms. Moore. All right, thank you. That takes care of that item. And let's see, getting back to our agenda here right quick. We have audit committee appointments on item 5 of the revised agenda that we have. The chair has nominated Secretary Trey Hargett, the Secretary of State of Tennessee, to be chair of the audit committee to replace Mr. Barker. And also would like to nominate Lonnie Archer and Christy Maxwell to serve as members of the audit committee. I make that motion. Is there a second? We have a second from Mr. Barker on that. All right, any discussion on the appointment of those members to those capacities? Seeing none, call the roll on the motion.
Mr. Barker. Mr. Cox.
Aye.
Mr. Ellis.
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye.
Director Long.
Aye.
Ms. Maxwell.
Aye.
Ms. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Stanfield.
Aye.
Mr. Wormsley.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well. Unanimous.
All right, that item is approved. All right, next item would be to take the administrative committee report. And as part of that, Jamie Wayman, if you would, just take up the political subdivision seeking participation on item 6, all right?
Thank you, Treasurer. This morning, the Administrative Committee met in Conference Room D on the 8th floor at 9 a.m. Our only 2 action items were approval of the minutes of the March 6, 2025 meeting, and also heard about a Cumberland Plateau Water Authority that was seeking participation in TCRS. We also provided a legislative update and operations update during that meeting. For the political subdivision seeking participation in TCRS, it's Cumberland Plateau Water Authority. They're seeking participation effective July 1st, 2025, in the regular, or what we refer to as the Legacy Defined Benefit Plan. They are not providing prior service or service rendered to the employer prior to their date of participation in TCRS. They have 25 employees. They are including cost of living benefits, but they're excluding coverage for their part-time employees. The employer rate recommended for them is 6.9%, and their employees will contribute 5% of pay. And so with that, the Administrative Committee asked me to make a recommendation to the Board of Trustees to approve Cumberland Plateau Water Authority to participate in TCRS effective July 1st, 2025, and I make that motion.
Okay, is there a second for the motion? We have a second, Mr. Wormsley. All right, any discussion? All right, seeing none, call the roll on the motion to adopt the item.
Mr. Barker. Aye. Mr. Cox.
Aye.
Mr. Ellis.
Aye.
Treasurer Lillard.
Aye.
Director Long.
Aye.
Ms. Maxwell.
Aye.
Ms. Moore.
Aye.
Mr. Stanfield.
Aye.
Mr. Wormsley.
Aye.
And I vote aye as well.
Okay, that's adopted, and that item is moved on here. We've got item number 7, which is the investment report is the next item. And we'll call up Mark Brubaker and Joe Abadou of Ferris Consulting to give that, along with Michael Brakebill, CFA, our Chief Investment Officer.
Thank you, Treasurer. While Mark's pulling up the presentation, I'll just give a quick overview. You generally have this in your packet. With the acceleration of the board meetings, we had a hard time getting this one together and didn't distribute this one. And there's actually, this is a near final draft. There's one particular number that's still in draft form, but pretty much it's 99.9% together. So with that, I wanted to make that quick introduction and turn it over to Mark.
Great, and I wanted to congratulate Mr. Barker and all of the other board members who are rolling off. It's been a privilege to work with you, and I wish you all the best. And I'll try to be brief with my comments since we're 3/4 of the way through the fiscal year with the first quarter numbers. And just starting with a quick market backdrop, as you're probably all aware, I think the big story that was driving the markets in the first quarter and continues in the second quarter are the tariffs and the tariff policy and the ever-changing status of those tariffs going forward. But what the fear of the impact of the tariffs started weighing on the markets in about mid-February. The markets peaked in early February in the U.S. And then from that point forward, they ended up moving downward, and most of the U.S. equity markets indices, as you can see on this page, were down about 4.5% for the quarter. President Trump announced the tariff policy on April 2nd, and from that point forward, the next 5 trading days, the U.S. equity markets were down 12% from that point in time. And when they hit their trough in April, they were down over 20% from their peak, which is the definition of a bear market. That's only part of the story. Since that time, some of these tariffs have been rescinded, delayed, renegotiated, and so what we've seen in the market's response since that time has been very positive. So now, if you look at the S&P 500, for example, it was down 4.3% in the first quarter. It's now up 1.4% on a year-to-date basis through yesterday. The other thing that I would point to, we've talked about this in prior meetings, but the Magnificent Seven stocks, those mega cap technology names like Microsoft, NVIDIA, Tesla, that have been really driving the markets both up and down, mostly up over the past 3 years, had a sharply negative return in the first quarter. Magnificent Seven, it's estimated that they lost 2.6 trillion in market cap during the first quarter alone. However, just like with the markets overall in the second quarter, they've bounced back strongly. So large cap growth stocks have led the market back. Large cap growth is up 11.8% quarter to date thus far in the second quarter. Just going down the list, the other thing I'd point to is large cap stocks outperformed, albeit in a negative market environment, outperformed small cap stocks by a wide margin. But then the other interesting thing is international stocks outperformed U.S. stocks in a fairly dramatic fashion in the first quarter. And if you look at that table, the MSCI EFA index, which is a developed markets index, was up 6.9% during the quarter, while U.S. stocks were down 4.3%. So pretty wide margin of outperformance from international equities. We haven't seen that in quite some time in the markets. Some of that was derived from currency. The U.S. dollar had been declining during the first quarter, and that accounted for about 3.5% of that return differential. International stocks, by the way, continue their strong return in the second quarter thus far. They're now up 18.1% on a year-to-date basis. That compares again to the 1.4% return for U.S. stocks. So really kind of a reversal of a fairly long-standing trend with international stocks now leading the market. Emerging markets were up 2.9%. They're now up 11.2% on a year-to-date basis. Fixed income was positive. The Bloomberg Aggregate Index was up 2.8% for the quarter. But I'll leave the market review at that, and I'll just move forward to the next slide where we take a look at your assets and the allocation. The assets ended the quarter just at $71.8 billion, which is down slightly. I think it was $71.9 billion at the end of the calendar year. Just down slightly from there. But you can see that the asset allocation is diversified, it's in line with policy, and as has been the case for several quarters, or actually more than several quarters, private equity is over-allocated by about 2.7% at the end of the quarter, and that's offset primarily by an under-allocation to public U.S. equities. And you're not alone on that front. Most of your state retirement peers are over allocated to private equity due to the dynamics of that market. And it's nothing to be concerned about. And there's a plan in place to kind of gradually bring that back to within policy. Going on to this next slide, we take a look at your returns. You can see the total fund returns in the dark blue at the top of the page. And for fiscal year to date, up 3.82%. So given the strong equity returns, at least that we've seen in the second quarter, not sure if we're going to make that 6.75% actuarial assumed rate of return, but there is certainly a chance of that happening depending on how the remainder of June goes. And if you look out at the longer term results, the 5-year number, 10.1%, that ranks in the top 37% or almost in the top third of your state retirement peer universe. And then 10 years, 7.4%, again, well ahead of that actuarial assumed rate of return of 6.75, and also ranks in the top quartile among your peers. Just to very quickly highlight some of the drivers of the strong returns. Your U.S. equity portfolio, while it more or less matched the index over the past 1-year period, on a relative basis, you rank near the top decile compared to your peers' U.S. equity portfolios. So that was a strong contributor on a peer relative basis. And also your strategic lending portfolio, which is the private credit primarily, did very well. On the negative side, and I highlight this because it had been such a strong driver of outperformance relative to benchmarks in years past, was the international developed markets equity. And that is a result of several of your of the developed markets growth-oriented managers had a difficult market or time given the markets internationally. And with that, I will stop there, and if there are any questions, I'd be happy to answer them, or otherwise I'll turn it over to Michael.
Thanks, Mark. I have to figure out my technology here. There we go. Mr. Barker, it's been a pleasure working with you all these years. So thank you very much. And on the same kind of level of tenure, I would like to say, where is he? Daniel Cruz back here has been with us for 25 years in Treasury, over 25 years in Treasury. He's got a master's in finance from MTSU, CFA, CAIA. He led our international, our private equity portfolio for a number of years. And with Thomas Kim's left to take the deputy position at Maryland, we've asked Daniel to be the deputy CIO, and I wanted to say I'm really excited. He's a great guy, really worked with him forever. He's wonderful. So thank you, Daniel. It's interesting, one of the great things about our program and the support we've had from all of you and from the treasurer is just the quality of the people that we have. You know, list of my deputy CIOs like Daniel, Andy Palmer, who's CIO right now in the state of Maryland, Derek Dagnan, he's CIO of City of Fort Worth, and Thomas Kim, who's left, who's deputy CIO of Maryland as well. So it's been a wonderful thing, and we've had a great quality of people who have been able to do well here and then go on to other places and really succeed as well. So what I do, and I'll do the same thing I've been doing really through COVID, which I wanted to walk through kind of what was happening with the economy. This style of the presentation I've given you, it may be time to kind of modify this, but basically I look at kind of the standard things. Inflation, how's inflation moved through the economy through the pandemic? How does growth look? How do markets look? Monetary policy, geopolitics, et cetera. Housing has been a key thing that we've talked about for a long time, because that big, huge mountain on the bottom table on the right was the fire that was lit under housing due to the interest rates falling so low during the pandemic, plus the demand that was increased as people decided, well, if I'm at my house all the time, I need a better house. And so that created this massive spike in housing prices that had to be controlled, and that's what one of the things the Fed had attacked. You'll notice that we really, that fall off is that was successful. We tamped down housing, that part is moderated. In fact, all the indications we're seeing from apartment rentals and from housing markets right now is it continues to soften. So on an inflationary front, and housing in various forms is the majority of inflation calculations. So this really will put a dampener, even with tariffs, on what's going forward. Goods, this is kind of the part that would be impacted by tariffs. It has crept up, but you can see in relation to the peak during the pandemic, it still looks reasonably benign, but we'll see how that looks going forward. Employment has been really interesting to watch because we had this massive boom in demand for, well, obviously the peak there that's on there was when employment collapsed. So this is unemployment claims. The peak that I had to cut off because it was too high for the graph is when everyone was laid off during the pandemic. Then it recovered sharply. It has slowly weakened, but you really don't see that in claims so much. We keep watching it. Today we had unemployment, the employment report, 139,000 jobs for the month, which was interpreted as a good number, but it's really pretty soft. So employment has moderated, but you don't see it in here that much. The Federal Reserve has a quarterly report called the Beige Book, where they survey all the different 12 districts. And this came out on 2 days ago. And it's interesting, I showed you this last time in March, and it was interesting, their commentary about economic growth. Economic activity has declined slightly since the previous report, meaning from March to June, they saw a slight decline in economic activity. Half the districts reported slight to moderate declines. 3 districts reported no change, and 3 had slight growth. So, we're in this mode right now where the economy is kind of slowing a little bit. None of us know how much. This survey, Evercore ISI is a brokerage firm we get their research from. They do a wonderful job with their company surveys. This is their average company survey, and interestingly enough, it shows, you can see the downward movement. I looked at this compared to the March presentation that I delivered for you. It's actually a little better. So it's a little better over the last 3 months. You can barely tell because of the size. This is a long period, but it's actually a little better. One of the key issues that occurred early in the year due to the tariffs, and we talked about this at the March meeting, was there was this massive pull forward in goods into the United States. And there's just a mechanical calculation on GDP where if you have a massive imports and exports don't compensate for that, it makes the number negative. It's not, economic activity really hasn't changed. It's just the way it's calculated. This is what GDP now, a thing the Federal Reserve of Atlanta had last March. This is the chart that I showed you for the last quarter. There's been a reversal where we pulled in all those goods, that all stopped. Here's the one for June. This is just for a few days ago, and you can see a massive spike. So it just is a calculation error as much as anything else. So, and one thing I was trying to impress on you is when you heard all these news reports about negative GDP growth and how bad the first quarter was, that was really just a calculation error as much as anything else. And this shows, this graph shows the massive import in goods that created that kind of fluky number. Valuations are still high, and we struggle with that because, it's, when you're putting money to work, when you're out into the markets and you see how expensive stocks are, you kind of question where we are. And you look over time and you look at these different periods, and this is the median. This is basically ranking the median stock in the S&P 500 and how it has moved over time. And you know, maybe it's not flashing red, but it's flashing yellow, and it's something to be aware of. With that, stocks, as Mark mentioned, have continue to perform very well, in spite of this. Bonds, on the other hand, we had a reflation. Bonds prices fell pretty dramatically. Yields rose. This graph is yields of the LPF portfolio, which is the way we manage our bond portfolio. You can see it really matches that time pre-GFC, really, that 2003, 2007 period. Yields of fixed income look pretty attractive. Our fixed income portfolio yields about 5.3% right now. And if our expectation is 6.75 for the pension, that gets you a good ways there. On monetary policy, this has been one that we're watching. We went through our tightening period as we slowed down and we put on the brakes on the economy. We tried to bring that housing increase down, and you saw the huge spike. We started kind of coming off at the rates. We're in a easing cycle, but the economy really hasn't slowed that much. Our expectations is that will continue somewhere around another 3/4, maybe 1%, or maybe a couple cuts into the fall. But it shows you versus where we have been for the past 20 years, short rates are still pretty high. One thing I'd talk to you about, which has been a quirky thing in the marketplace through this past year, was what happened to European defense stocks when the administration came in. Basically, there was this fear in Europe that they needed to take over more of their defense. You put that in conjunction with there were severe budget constraints in the German budget, that they repealed the limits on how much they could borrow, and it just set their defense stocks on fire in Europe. This graph I'm showing you, this calendar year to date, this bucket of European defense stocks up 71%. When I put the chart together, NVIDIA, the hottest growth stock in the United States, was up 5% over that same period. So the hot place to be hasn't been in U.S. growth stocks. It's been into European defense stocks. And in the bottom on the right, or on the left there, Rheinmetall basically makes artillery shells. That stock basically has gone from 500 euros to 1,800 euros. So it's been a massive move upward to make artillery cells for Europe. So been a fascinating thing to watch. Where are we now? So 2 days ago, I got portfolio. It was a great day to pick the valuation. Sorry, Mark, we already hit the number. We had 8.1% return, fiscal year to date. So it's shocking to me. I keep thinking things should be a little softer, but they've been great. Total portfolio is $74.3 billion. We're up $4.3 billion fiscal year to date. So a great result. We have been keeping our equity weighting neutral and just keep getting surprised with how strong stocks are. So, when you sell stocks, you're bringing the risk of the portfolio down, but you're also kind of dampening the returns. And we keep thinking we should rebalance back to our targets. And you can tell on that, if you look at our international developed, we're up pretty substantially, and international developed has trounced U.S. stocks calendar year. So they've done much better. So that's how we're positioned right now, and pretty neutral, barring the kind of overweight to international developed versus U.S. So with that, I'll leave it with that and see if anyone has any questions or.
Okay, any questions of Mr. Breakville or Mr. Brubaker about the investment reports and all? Okay, seeing none, thank you all very much for that. Good work, okay? Next item is item number 9, the Aries and Data Conversion Projects Update. Mr. Wayman, would you like to give us an overview of that?
Yes, sir. Thank you, Treasurer. So each of you should have in front of you a graph that talks about ARIS project milestone timeline. And as a reminder, we are currently in the midst of a 5-year project to replace our pension administration solution that we entered into a contract with a company named Sagitech in August of 24 with a go-live date of April 2029. We're a little over a year, almost a year into the project. We're still on time and on budget with the project. We're currently, the project is divided into 3 phases, pilot 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3. And with each of those groupings, you group like modules, like topics together that you're trying to program or develop. So in pilot 4.1, which lasts from October of 24 through January of 26, we're looking at demographics, which is both demographics of members and employers. Membership, what types of plans are they in? What membership do they have? How are members enrolled into the system? How do employers report the salary and contributions to the retirement plan? So that's the phase that we're currently in. So we're defining the fields needed for the employer screens and designing screens to be used for work streams to manage employee benefit information, such as how they log in, payments, identification of system users, monthly status reports. And as part of this also, we have selected a data conversion, data cleansing vendor named MBS, and they are looking at our data to try to get that in as pristine a condition as it can be, but also working directly with the Sagitech to convert data as it's needed to test the new system for each of those modules. So coming up between October and December of 2025, we hope to complete development, or between now and December 2025, complete development of the pilot 4.1, conduct integration testing, have the features of that pilot demonstrated to us and allow us to do some user testing on that, and then we'll get into section 4 or pilot 4.2. We're still in the middle of looking at beneficiaries, how we manage beneficiaries, financial information and tracking that data, employer self-service, document processing, and we'll have and different interfaces we'll have with various vendors. So with that, that is the update on the ARIS project. Again, we're still, a little over a year into a 5-year project, or not quite a year into a 5-year project, and we're still on budget, on target, and we'll continue. And there's been a lot of time being spent by a lot of staff across the department, I think, on a daily basis when we have these meetings. It's not unusual to have 25 or 30 Treasury staff or more participating in that, along with all of the members of the Pension Administration Delivery Team and Sagitech and some MBS folks. So on top of everything else that we're doing on a daily basis, we're spending a lot of time supporting and hoping to make that project successful. So,
any questions of Mr. Wayman? Now, Jamie, I just want to make sure we've got a complete understanding about this. You are, in fact, guaranteeing that this is going to revolutionize retirement processing in Tennessee, right?
That is what our goal is to make that as automated as possible, where a person can, streamline and apply, and between the time they apply, it can work its way through the process and calculations with as little human intervention as possible and get them quickly on payroll.
So you heard it here today first. So, make a mark in your book on that. All right. Thank you very much for that guarantee there, Jamie. All right. The next item is item 10, which is opportunity for public comment. Pursuant to the statute, I'll ask if there's any public comment for the TCRS board today. Seeing none, let the record reflect that there is none. I'll point out under other business here, item number 11, that we have future board meetings set forth as set on your agenda here for September 5, 2025 and December 5, 2025. Those are tentative dates at this point. And today, after today's session, we are going to have board training on actuarial matters by Mr. Thacker and company. So we'll look forward to members participating in that if you can. It's your opportunity to get the greatest free sandwich you'll ever get in your life. So, right there. And before we adjourn, I'm going to give the investment committee report. Then I'm going to call on Mr. Barker to give his final audit committee report as the last item today. I chair the investment committee of the TCRS Board of Trustees. Your Investment Committee met today and approved 2 private equity transactions and also approved a real estate transaction as well. And Michael Brakebill and Mr. Brubaker and Joe Abadou gave a report on investments of the system. So that's the report of the Investment Committee. And Mr. Barker, for the final time, in 21 years, I'm calling on you to give the audit report as chair of the Audit Committee.
Thank you, Treasurer. The Audit Committee met this morning at 8 o'clock to discuss a few items on our agenda. Our only action item was to approve the minutes from the previous meeting, March the 7th, which that was done. But I wanted to comment just quickly on a report of the review of the records and all the work that goes on kind of behind the scenes to be sure that everything is meeting standards and whatever. But anyway, just a couple of things from the conclusion from the Gadsby report. After the review of all the information, it says this: we independently reconcile the fiscal year 2024 outbound actuary files with the following results. Active member population with an accuracy rate of 99.98%. A retired member population with an accuracy rate of 99.61%. I just want to personally commend the staff on these outstanding results and being sure that our records are all up to date and that things are being reported and done as they should be. One other item that we had on our agenda was to discuss the Comptroller's hotline. There has been one report to that hotline, and that's being followed up. Jamie and others are following up on that particular item. That's a report from the Audit Committee for the last time, Mr. Chairman.
All right. Any questions of Mr. Barker about his committee report? All right, seeing none, that brings us to the last item on our agenda, which is adjournment. Mr. Barker, do you want to adjourn? Yes, sir. All right. Do you make a motion to adjourn? He does. All right. Do we have a second?
I'll second.
We have a second. All right. All right. We have a second here from Mr. Cox down here. Okay. So, all right. All those in favor of signifying their favorable to adjournment, say aye.
Aye.
Those opposed, no. The ayes have it, and we're adjourned. Thank you very much, and thank you for everything you do for the state of Tennessee and the Tennessee Consolidated Retirement System.